back to the Dean Obeidallah show. We are live here Thursday, September 14th. Joining us now, I'm very happy to have back my buddy, Ali Velshi, an award-winning journalist. He hosts Velshi on MSNBC from 10 a.m. to noon now, Saturday and Sunday. It was 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Now Eastern time, 10 a.m. to noon. And he's the editor and writes the introduction for a brand new book coming out, The Trump Indictments, the 91 criminal counts against the former president of the United States. Sounds like a great read.
I wrote it for myself because I don't have to keep carrying this stuff around, right? I have them bound every time and I read them like cover to cover. And I'm not like you. I'm not a lawyer. Like I'm reading 50 pages of legal stuff and it's, a little complicated for me. So I actually put it together in one little book that you can carry. So it's only for me. I hope other people buy the book, but I really just wrote it for me.
I think it's really interesting. I'm going to pick it up. I think it goes on sale September 25th,
That's
26th.
Right. Yeah.
So I know the dates. I'm all set. So, all right. A short time ago, we found out that Hunter Biden was indicted.
Right.
And, you have to take a step back in a way. This is the first time the child of a sitting president has been indicted. And the person who did the special counsel who championed this is a Donald Trump appointee. I mean, this guy, Merrick Garland made him a special counsel, but he was a Donald Trump personal appointee.
Yeah.
And the difference is I don't expect Democrats to be calling this a partisan witch hunt, although they could make that argument. The U.S. attorney was appointed by Donald Trump personally, and now he's charged the son of the guy he's running against here. But you're not going to hear any of that. If it was the GOP, they'd be, look at this. This is what political prosecution looks like.
The party pretty late, right? I mean, you remember the investigation into Hillary Clinton. One could say she was, 18 hours or how much testimony she gave. One could say she was exonerated, or one could say she lost the election, right? I mean, and Kevin McCarthy will be the one to tell you that those things probably cost her the election to Donald Trump. So, yeah, I think people get late to this party. I know that I've been reading all these indictments. I podcast them. I put it into a book. I hope people read this Hunter Biden indictment. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a judge, and I'm not on the jury. And so people can make their minds up for themselves. It may be clear when you read the indictment that a crime was committed, but I want people to understand what we're talking about here, because this becomes part of this playbook of there being a Biden crime family and all this kind of stuff. There was a form that you have to fill out when you get a license to carry a gun. He did not fill that out properly. And that's up to society to decide what penalty one faces for that. But I just want everybody to understand what exactly the indictment is. There was nobody trying to overthrow any governments. There was no conspiracy to undermine an election or anything like that. He did something. The courts will decide what it is, but it doesn't seem to match what the rhetoric is going on Capitol Hill about not only this indictment and the Biden crime family, but now the impeachment that they're trying to get underway of President Biden. I don't know. If I'm a voter in one of these districts, I wouldn't want my member of Congress getting too involved and excited about this.
Oh, but they will. On the right, they're gonna somehow find Joe Biden. He was involved with the gun. He gave Hunter Biden the pen to write on the form, whatever it might be.
And that's the thing to understand. Like it sounds like it's a gun crime, or there are all sorts of things about it. It was the form in which you fill out to get a gun. Now, people go to jail for things. Michael Cohen will tell you all the time what he actually went to jail for was a tax issue. Right. I mean, what's his name? Al Capone went to jail on a tax issue. I'm not. That's not for me to judge. I'm just saying that people carry this information around and get it wrong. It's a 4-page indictment. You've read it. Probably worth reading.
And, it's also funny how on the right, when it comes to the Second Amendment, they don't want any hindrances to you acquiring a gun. But when it comes to Hunter Biden, like you see the form, he left something out. He's got to go to jail.
Right. But the NRA would like most people to suggest, and that they are a protection racket for a lot of Republicans. There should be no form. There's no form, no record, no nothing. They're like, you want a gun? You get a gun. End of story. But yes, he left something off the form.
Look, I mean, and he's got to answer for it. Do you think, though? I mean, you can't speak for all the corporate media, but you work in that world. Do you think there'll be some pressure by some when they're reporting on Donald Trump's criminality, the charges, 91 felonies, that they'll feel like, and now we have to cover Hunter Biden because he's charged? Or you don't think that there's going to be that? Because they're not apples to apples.
I think the context is always important, right? There are a lot of people who get very excited by the idea that Donald Trump is the first former president to ever have faced indictment. That's not the point. The point is the very reason I've edited this book that's coming out is to read the actual indictments and to understand what's in them. The content, the matters for which Donald Trump et al. Have been charged are actually about our democracy and what we think our democracy should be and how we might buttress it against future attacks on our democracy.
Right.
If someone charged Donald Trump, and let me tell you, I have a view on this, and that is that some things Donald Trump faces charges for, I don't necessarily feel are as important as other things. It doesn't mean they're unimportant, and I don't like this concept of determining what, some people should be charged with things because they're murder and people who speed shouldn't be. But some things are more important than others. And undermining our democracy is a really important matter. That's the thing that the American citizen and my viewer and your listener has to be concerned with. Not whether you like Donald Trump. If you don't like Donald Trump, there's an election mechanism to not have Donald Trump as your president. And that's for Americans to decide. That's the distinction here. So no, there's no world in which you can compare the 91 charges Donald Trump faces with the indictment of Hunter Biden. And anybody who feels that they have some compulsion or necessity to do that is not thinking about it correctly.
I wonder if there's any people in America who are in the middle. I don't know if the middle exists anymore, but if they are and they follow things a little bit and they go, wow, these Donald Trump handpicked U.S. attorney indicted the son of Joe Biden. That crosses the line. Like, you shouldn't be, no children, even the mafia says keep the family out of it. And he went after the children. And I think and I remember I wrote an article for MSNBC in 2019 about Ivanka, because Crew was flagging it left and right. I'm like, why isn't people writing about Ivanka getting trademarks from China and Japan? Literally, while the leader of China is there, while her dad's negotiating a trade deal, they're throwing trademarks at her. Japan, the same thing. And I'm like, why? And I'm not saying there was a crime. I'm like, why? And I have Democratic members of Congress, and it felt like it was somehow tawdry to talk about Ivanka. At least Jamie Raskin's talking about it now. Now, Jared, he defends MBS the whole time.
A whole lot of money out of this.
$2 billion when he comes out.
Right. And by the way, I'm trying to think, my memory's not what it used to be. I'm trying to think about how much experience Jared has as a financial manager of funds. Zero. Zero experience. But that was interesting, because if you're going to take a lot of money from a sovereign wealth fund like Saudi Arabia, at least they have an investment board, right? A board that evaluates who you're going to give your money to. And I'm forgetting what the board said about whether they should invest money with. No,
right.
Actually, they said no, because this guy has no experience actually managing money. But he got this massive investment from Saudi Arabia. And Mohammed bin Salman, who the world, including American intelligence agencies, have determined had a man butchered, a critic of his government butchered and killed with a bone saw. That's what I'm saying. I mean, it does seem like we have different ways of applying justice.
And I've written about that since, after that article came in the New York Times about a year ago, how Jared Kushner was the #1 man in the White House defending Saudi Arabia all the time and convincing Donald to defend MBS against what his own intelligence agencies were saying. And then Donald Trump comes out, and it doesn't get much fanfare, but he gets the Saudi golf tournament at his courses, making, the estimates are millions of dollars, because there's no demand for public disclosure of that. But the estimates were millions of dollars are just funneling to Trump there, sort of like a thank you for what you did for us in the White House. This is pay for play in another way. And if Trump were to get back in office, it is so already a conflict of interest. Not that it matters. With Trump, that's the least.
There are a whole bunch. Saudi's one government, but there are a handful of governments in the world who would really like Donald Trump back.
Sure.
The pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu from America, he's never felt that kind of pressure before. Donald Trump never put any pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu at all. Trump and Jared carry on about this Abraham Accords. I'm trying to remember the number of Palestinians who were involved in that deal negotiating. Zero also.
Yeah.
The Saudis be very happy to have him back. The Russians, Vladimir Putin's been chiming in on the prosecutions of Donald Trump. And I mean, this is the thing. There is a payoff for this. All Donald Trump has to do, and it is not an insurmountable matter, is win the nomination and win the election. And it's conceivable, as we sit here today, that could happen, Dean. And when he does that, he's going to have a lot of built-in friends. There are a whole lot of other people, by the way, NATO and other countries who, were really sad about the things that Donald Trump did, and were really happy when Biden came back in and sort of gave the America's back idea. I mean, Biden did take NATO Humpty Dumpty and put him back on the wall, and it has proved to be very effective in holding off the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Donald Trump planted some good seeds while he was president, and he could enjoy the fruits of those trees if he becomes president again.
The interesting thing is how Western Democratic leaders and Eastern Democratic leaders aren't the biggest fans of Trump, but dictators, oligarchs, and tyrants, they love him.
They like him a lot. Yeah.
And it says so much. With Ali Velshi. So Ali, on your show on Velshi, which is on Saturday and Sunday between 10 a.m. to noon Eastern time, and I was on a couple of weeks ago. You've been covering Section 3 of the 14th Amendment a great deal. I've seen clips like, and you had me on to talk about it. One thing about, and I got to tell you, I got literally thousands of people email me, and I responded to everyone sending the link. Here's a link. Send your email.
Told people right to their secretaries of state.
I said, and people, and I've had secretary of states on my show. I just had Adrian Fontes from Arizona on yesterday, Jocelyn Benson last week. So I've been very focused on this, and I asked them very practical questions. I said, you're a voter in your state. What can you do? But so what intrigues you about this? You've been covering your Lawrence Tribe on again, Michael Lutig and others. So what intrigues you about this?
You know, I'm always intrigued by the Constitution. In fact, yesterday I read it into a podcast, the whole Constitution, because I think everybody should. It's a small book, right? My copy is 30 pages long in a fairly good sized font. I think everybody should read it and understand that there's nothing. What Tribe and Ludig both said, which Jocelyn Benson has said, and Jenna Griswold from Colorado has said, is that in the end, while the argument is that the person responsible for having a person on the ballot and certifying them, which is the Secretary of State in most states, is the one who's going to have to face this, right? That's the people you've told your listeners to email. But they all understand this is not going to end with them. If some Secretary of State says Donald Trump can't go on the ballot or can't be seated, it's going to go to a court, and it's eventually going to get to the Supreme Court. And it's useful to understand that when it gets to the Supreme Court, notwithstanding the fact that the Supreme Court is not the exemplar of what we think a Supreme Court should be, what will they think this means, this clause? And the clause does say that if you have taken an oath to the Constitution, which I'm a naturalized citizen, right? Not everybody's taken an oath. If you're born a citizen of America, you may have never taken an oath to the Constitution. And if you are then involved in an insurrection, I don't know that this applies to you, but it definitely applies to me, right? I've taken an oath to become a citizen. So if I'm involved in an insurrection or I give aid and comfort to anybody who has been in one, I shouldn't be able to take office. Now, two interesting things. It doesn't say in the Constitution that you can't run for office. So is the determination made at the point that you go on the ballot, or the determination made at the point that you win? Number one. Number two, who makes the determination of whether you've been involved in an insurrection? There are definitely people in this country who say that didn't happen. And the Supreme Court may say that the January 6th committee and the impeachment determinations were not legal determinations. They were political determinations. So that goes back now to the cases, the indictments, right? Again, they don't all speak to insurrection, the language of the Constitution. So Donald Trump could end up convicted of a lot of these things and not of insurrection or rebellion against the United States. So I want everybody to understand so that they're not surprised. I'm not saying that it shouldn't go a certain way. I'm saying I want everybody to understand this. It's the same thing as reading the indictments. As you watch these cases unfold every day, at least you will know what the references are.
I agree. And that's the big thing. When I had on the Secretary of State's, and they're both lawyers. In fact, Secretary Benson used to be the dean of Wayne State Law School. I mean, she knows the law inside out. And I asked her so many questions, like a law school class, and she answered the best she could. But she says a lot of it we don't know the answers yet because it's not been litigated in the modern era.
It's never been tested. I mean,
except for New Mexico, that one case.
New Mexico, right? It was tested in New Mexico.
Right. That's the only modern day case about the January 6th case. It went to New Mexico. The Supreme Court of New Mexico refused to hear the appeal, essentially affirming it. So in New Mexico, the argument could be very compelling for a Secretary of State that January 6th was an insurrection because there was a trial and that was a determination. The Supreme Court left that case standing. But all that would do is let this. I agree with everyone. It's got to go to the Supreme Court. I don't want a Secretary of State somewhere having the power to throw a presidential candidate off a ballot and that be the binding decision.
Because the way things are today, with this politicized environment, you'll just have people randomly not put on the ballot. So it's really important that we see this through from now. And that's the point that that Ludig and Tribe and others are making, that this has to be figured out. And it may have to be litigated. Let's start now. Let's not start on election day or after Donald Trump has become the nominee stop hoping This business about the arc of history bending towards justice is simply not true. The arc of history bends exactly how you bend it. And so start bending it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's also whoever wins the elections, whoever's in power, writes the history about how it was.
That's right.
It bends in their way because in their mind,
that's right.
They were fighting for justice.
Which is exactly what Donald Trump's doing right now, right? He understands that if he becomes president of the United States again, and all you have to do is look to Israel to understand what's going on. Benjamin Netanyahu is in power again, and he is literally changing the laws of that country to prevent him from not being in power again because he's in the middle of a prosecution. He's indicted. Yep. He's under indictment and in the middle of prosecution. But being the president of a country or the prime minister of a country, in many cases, not in all cases, by the way, stops the prosecution. Donald Trump is more invested in being president than anyone else in the world because otherwise he got 91. He's got like 500 years in jail if all of these things get combined. So that's important for people to remember.
Yes, he is not just running for president. He's running the state of jail. Literally, that's what's going on. Correct. Because no one knows what will happen if he wins in the case in Georgia. More likely that gets tried after the election in any event because it's a complex case. But what if Trump were to win? He didn't leave peacefully in 2020. Do you think he leaves peacefully in 2028?
Depends. I think it's a psychological condition with him, and I think vindication works for him, right? I am worried, though, because the language he uses, you've talked to Ruth Ben-Ghiat before, is a lot like Mussolini's language, right? And the Mussolinis and the Hitlers of the world were not actually looking to spend another term in office and fix the electrical grid and stuff like that. They were dictators. And I think that's important to understand. The language Donald Trump uses is the language of an authoritarian and the language of a dictator. No dictator ever stepped down from office that I can recall. They tend to like the way it is. So I don't know what the end goal is, but I don't want to find out because remember when Donald Trump first got elected and we'd all sort of sit around, wait for him to make a speech and hope that it would be presidential. And, maybe this is the time. I remember his inaugural speech. It was some dark stuff, man. And then he gave that speech about the climate accord, and that was some dark stuff. Then he had his not the State of the Union, but the first speech when you're president. And that was some dark stuff. And we always kept thinking, he's president now. Maybe he's going to act like a president. Well, he didn't do it for an entire term in office, including until the last day. So what on earth do you think he would do differently the next time, except all the stuff he's told us that he will do? Invoke the military. He did say, by the way, the reason I read the Constitution is because I have something called the Banned Book Club. He's the only person in America who's called for the Constitution to be suspended. He said he didn't do it, but he posts everything. So the evidence is there. Remember, he said all the rules and regulations should be suspended, including the Constitution. The president of the United States talked about suspending the Constitution. Not, I don't agree with the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, suspending the Constitution. That's what you're in for if you vote for Donald Trump a second time.
He also proposed suspending the election. Remember during COVID, he put it in writing and then had to back off it. Yeah. And you know what we can't go back in time, but after the 2020 election, I don't understand why more in the media didn't look and talk about the polls leading up. It's not like Trump was leading in the polls and then he lost. You're like, wow, the average, and I went back to it recently, Real Clear Politics average, Biden was going by 8. There was a Fox News poll a week before election day, Biden winning by 10. So I don't know why people didn't go like, you actually slightly overperformed from the polls, but there's no polls that said you were going to win.
Right.
They all said you were going to lose.
Right.
So
it's not like some puzzlement. In fact, Republicans have tended to, because of the way polling works these days, have tended to be underrepresented in the polls. So in other words, if you kind of almost had to have Biden ahead by, depending on whose math you talked about, 4 to 7 or 8 points to make it even. And in that last poll before the election you were talking about at Fox, he was 10 points.
Yeah.
Right. So it would have been unusual at that point if he didn't win, notwithstanding all the problems with the Electoral College and the way these votes break down. So, there was a possibility. But yeah, it's not like everybody thought Donald Trump was going to win again.
Yeah.
A lot of people did vote for him. And I suppose if Dean, 70 million people plus voted for you or me for anything, you'd feel that's a pretty strong base upon which to build something. But in a normal world, he'd have built a movement that was meaningful, that actually addressed issues. But Dean, you and I talk about economics all the time. I don't debate economics with conservatives anymore. I'm sad about that, right? I would like to debate what minimum wage should be and how we should handle wage increases at the UAW that's getting ready to go up. We don't talk about that stuff because it's become a party that is obsessed with this thing that Donald Trump has created. It's about the election overturning. It's about the breaching the debt ceiling. It's about shutting down the government. It's about impeaching Joe Biden. I'm a taxpayer, man. I don't want my members of Congress worrying about this stuff. I want stuff done. I want my electrical grid to work. I want my air to be clean. I want safety. That's not what we deal with.
I agree. I'm talking with Ali Velshi from MSNBC, and the discussions are not about policy at all. I look forward to one day when it's about policy. I'm not sure.
Because you're like me. You like debating with people. You'd be happy
like
to go up against somebody else, right?
Yeah, it's not about. I like having a robust discussion with people that's honest about things, and and I don't expect to change their mind if they're hardened, but maybe people listening, you might change their mind or come up with good points afterwards. But you mentioned the economy. So yesterday we learned inflation, a bigger increase than expected. Today was the other inflation numbers. Wholesale prices went up, but the core inflation, when you take out some of them, I think it was energy, and you take that out.
Food and energy is what you take out.
About 0.2%,
right? Because you and I can't take food and energy out of our lives.
Well, that's the thing. But so here's the thing, though. According to yesterday, the inflation posted the biggest monthly increase this year. And it was energy prices, and you had gasoline jumping. And we've talked about the Fed raising interest rates to bring down inflation. Can any more Fed increases lower the cost of food and energy?
Well, this is full circle to a conversation we had a little earlier. Gasoline. So the top inflation gainers for August were gasoline, fuel oil, airline fares. Now, airline fares, two things are happening. People are traveling more, but the two biggest costs to any airline are labor and gas, right? So the top three things are all related to gasoline and oil. We have a problem with Saudi Arabia. The people who, even though Saudi Arabia is not the biggest oil producer in the world anymore, it is the most influential oil producer in the world because it's basically in charge of OPEC. And then there's this thing called OPEC Plus, which Russia is involved in. So Russia and Saudi Arabia, between the two of them, produce a lot of oil, and neither of them want Joe Biden reelected as president. They both want Donald Trump back. And one way to continue to do that is to agitate with respect to gas prices, right? It's highly influential, no matter what your politics. If you are the kind of person who will blame the president for the price of oil or the cost of inflation, then the opponents win. Now, here's the thing. Last midterm elections, we were all over the country talking about things. There were a lot of people I talked to who said that the issue of our time is women's reproductive rights and civil rights in general. Lots of other people said the only thing that matters is inflation. In the end, A, it wasn't inflation. B, enough people understood that Joe Biden is not responsible for global inflation. C, and I harped on this on my show, I would put up every opportunity I had, charts and charts and charts about where inflation is around the world. The U.S. has not been and is not anywhere close to the top of that list. This is a global issue. And C, the reason why when we talk about core inflation, we exclude food and energy is that food and energy are volatile. A drought, a shortage, a supply chain problem, a political problem will spike those things. So what they do is they take out the two most volatile things and say, if you took out these two things, what are the prices of everything else? How does that look? The problem is we as consumers cannot take out those two things. However, inflation is still much lower than it has been for a long time. The Fed increases did actually work. We're on the right track on this stuff. All that's happening here is the Fed is saying we are not taking our foot off the brakes, as it is. When you increase interest rates, you're hitting the brakes on the economy, right? It's not the gas. We're not taking our foot off the brake just yet. We're not in the clear just yet. What you're seeing is wages are going up in some places. Saw the UPS strike that was averted. Big wage increases, biggest union in America. You now see United Auto Workers. That's not as big, but they're very, very big. They're asking for a 36% increase in wages. So what happens is every time you get wage increases, you do have upward pressure on inflation because labor costs more. On the other hand, you have more people making more money. So you end up like Norway, where prices are really, really high and wages are really, really high. And over time, that evens out and it's all okay. But in the time that it takes you to even it all out, which could be 5 years, 10 years, it's terrible. It's really hard.
That's interesting. And I'm glad you point out like another country, Norway, as an example, because we do have mean, even though the inflation's hotter than it was supposed to be, the stock market today, and that's obviously ephemeral, but it's
high, and people have 401ks.
Right.
Stock market's up.
Now it's jumped today in big numbers because
Yep.
they're like, the big point I saw in the article, I said Wall Street Journal or CNBC, was that while inflation's going up a little, consumers are buying and they have jobs.
Correct.
They're not worried about a recession
That's
anymore.
right. The consumer's not given up.
Right.
They've not said, I'm done. If you live in the consumer is still holding in there, but it's a very delicate balance that the Fed is playing here. And it's a very hard thing to do because you're balancing. It's like you're a jeweler and you're balancing a scale. But these are such big inputs that sometimes you see a rate increase and you don't see the effect of it for 3-4 months down the road.
Or longer. Yeah, they say it's a lagging impact.
Like, for instance, if the auto workers go on strike, price of cars goes up again. That's a big thing. For most people, their housing is their biggest cost. Transportation is their second biggest cost. Oil prices go up. It means you fill your tank. You're getting exactly the same product you did 1 week ago for more money, right? That's a complete loss of money for you. So it's a really complicated dance. And I think the Fed's been okay at it for now, but we'll have to see.
And in the last minute, can you you touched on it earlier, the Trump indictments, the book you wrote, the forward, and edited the 91 criminal counts against the former president of the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Because it goes on sale September 25th.
Yeah, it's all of the indictments, all 4 of the indictments in 4 jurisdictions. It's unedited, unabridged. I've written a forward to provide some context as to why it is. It's my hope that people will not just buy it and keep it with them when this is going on, but give it to somebody who doesn't see your perspective on this and say to them, it's not that big a book, by the way. It's a couple hundred pages.
Right.
Just read it. Just read it. It's going to be hard reading. It's not the most easy thing in the world, but just read it and be informed about the decisions your country is making.
I'm going to get it. The Trump indictments, 91 criminal counts against the former president of the United States. Ali Velshi, our buddy, editor, and writes the forward. Ali, it's always great chatting with you. It was great being on your show a couple of weeks ago. I appreciate that, and I always appreciate you coming on here. Look forward to chatting with you in the future.